There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another episode of In Other Words, an occasional series where I talk about word etymologies, word origins for vocabulary that I encounter in my reading. I've recently started doing these in a more minimalistic way, so 3 words or expressions per episode, which is why I now call them we in other words. So let's get started. The first word I have for you is from one of my favorite novels by one of my favorite writers, Crampton, Hodnet by Barbara Pym. I can't find my paper copy. It's in this messy house somewhere. Anyway, here is the sentence, and it is a vintage Barbara Pym sentence. Oh, I should tell you the word first. The word is sprightly. And here is this wonderful sentence. Actually, it occurs, my Kindle showed me that it's occurred umpteen times in the novel, but this is the first occurrence. They walked into the dining room, talking happily about dyspepsia. Miss Morrow followed, feeling rather young and sprightly. So, sprightly means full of spirit or vigor, brisk, lively, sprightly. And it's actually a variant of spirit, but also of another version of that word, which in linguistic circles is called a doublet. Sprite, like the soda pop, like the pop Sprite. So notice the difference in spelling. We're going to talk about both variations. A doublet is when 2 words enter, in this case, the English language, going back to the same ancestral word, but in a different genealogical, etymological path. Sprightly comes more from the sprite as in the soda pop. It entered English in around the year 1300, and it goes back to Old French esprit and the Latin spiritus. And the spiritus is the ancestor of both. It also, being a doublet, in the early decades, if not centuries, in English, it had basically the same meaning as spirit, breath, the principle of life, the Holy Ghost, the mind, the intellect. But as it evolved in English, it took on this, by the mid-14th century, it took on this meaning that if you've read any Shakespeare, which I haven't for decades, but you might remember sprite in some Shakespeare plays, The Tempest in particular, where sprite took on the connotation of an angel, a demon, a fairy, an apparition, a ghost. These creatures, these ethereal creatures, were characterized by their light, flitting movements and mannerisms. There's the link, right? Sprightly, meaning young and full of vim and vigor. And the sprites, light, flitting movements and mannerisms. So there you go. I think my sprightly days are gone. But spirit, the more common name, the more common variation, entered English around the same time, meaning, as I've said already, life, the animating or vital principle in man and animals, and also the idea of breath. And breath is very important. We don't think of it in terms of sprite or sprightly, but we do think of it very much with the more traditional, more common variation, spirit. So many other words have derived from spirit, just for a few examples. Conspire, expire, perspire, inspire, and there's many more. Transpire, aspire. I love that word family, actually. It's near and dear to my heart. And there is definitely some crossover. Like, often, I think maybe more in the Victorian era, the spirit world was a way of talking about the supernatural. So definitely there's crossover. High spirits, soul and spirits, all of that stuff. Both of them go back to the Latin word spiritus, which goes back to a Proto-Indo-European root, which I don't know how to pronounce, space, there it is. However, there is some disagreement. Other etymologists say, no, it doesn't go back to that Proto-Indo-European root. It is an onomatopoeic formation. I think most of you know what onomatopoeia is, but how many of you can spell it? I don't think I can. Where the word originates from the sound and is spelled according to the sound. So this really captured my imagination, that there's something in sp that mimics, that captures the act of breathing. Spirit. That's fascinating. So there is a big controversy in the linguistic world about where spirit goes back to, but we'll leave that there. Just as a quick aside, there's some conjecture that it's sprightly might relate to spry, but nobody's been able to prove it. So the next word is wayward, which, is one of those words that just appeals to my personality and traumatic past. It came from the novel by Kavita Bedford that I read this year, called Friends in Dark Shapes. I have a full review of that novel by an Indo-Australian author. Loved it, 5-star read. Check out my review if you're interested. But that's where I encountered Wayward. I don't have the book. It was a library book, and I didn't jot down the sentence. So Wayward has a few closely related meanings in English: following one's own capricious, wanton, or depraved inclinations. Now you know why it's one of my favorite words. Or following no clear principles or laws, or the opposite of what is desired or expected. A wayward son kind of sums all of that up, doesn't it? And it goes back to away and the suffix ward. So let's talk about away first. Away is an adverb that goes back to way, the noun. And of course, way, the noun, means the road, path, course of travel, etc. And it's going way back in English to Old English, and it came into English from the Proto-Germanic, Old High German, Gothic. And the Proto-Indo-European root is way, if that's how it's pronounced. There's the spelling, which means to go, move, or transport in a vehicle. Other words we get from that Proto-Indo-European root are always, convection, convey, convex, convoy, deviate. There's so many, I'm just going to pick a few more. Impervious, invective, inveigh, obviate, obvious, trivia, vector, wagon, vogue, weigh and weight, wiggle. Okay, that would be a fun rabbit hole to go down someday. But the idea is, the adverb away is that you are not in one's accustomed place, not in one's own place. You're away. And it shows up in a lot of phrases, phrasal verbs, and so on. Give away, throw away, fire away, right away, a mile away, away back. Let's talk about the suffix ward, because, oh my goodness, there's a lot of fascinating words. Many of them we still use, but there's a bunch of them that we don't. The adverbial suffix ward expresses direction. Came into Old English, going back to Proto-Germanic, Old Saxon, Old Frisian, and Old Norse. And the Proto-Indo-European root, there's a couple of them, but the original one is were. Here it is. And from were we get words like adverse, anniversary, awry, controversy, diverge, invert, hello, inward, prose, rhapsody, rhombus, vermicelli, verse, vertigo, worth, wrangle, ring, rye, and many more. But actually, I'm more interested in the other words we get that end in ward. Obviously, the basic ones are forward, backward, toward, and others that you and I both know like the back of our hand. But let's look at some unusual ones. Froward, this is not a typo. Froward, F-R-O, not F-O-R, is an adverb meaning, it's not used anymore, but it fell out of favor in English in the 17th century. But it entered English in the 12th century, meaning turned against, perverse, disobedient, peevish, petulant. I don't know why. We think we need that word back, don't you? It's the opposite of an early meaning of toward. Could also mean about to depart or departing. Fromward, also obsolete, from late Old English, and means, like I just said about froward, about to depart, or doomed to die, or with back turned. It's also an opposite of an earlier meaning of toward. I think my favorite is, because I'd never thought of this as being in the same word family, but awkward is actually a member of this family. It entered English in the mid-14th century, and the original meaning was in the wrong direction. That's fascinating. And the first part of it, awk, A-W-K, meant backhanded. Then it goes back to a Proto-Indo-European root apo, from which we get words like after, aperitif, aperture, apocalypse, apocryphal, and so on. But awkward comes from awk, meaning backhanded, and this suffix ward. The original sense of being in the wrong direction is obsolete, but it evolved to mean turned the wrong way and then clumsy, wanting ease and grace in movement. And I just think that is incredibly fascinating. There were other formations in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries that we don't have anymore. Awky, awkly, and awkness. The last word for tonight is vernissage. Vernissage. I'm not sure how it's pronounced in English or French, but I think vernissage sounds right. It came from my book of the year this year, Collected Works by Lydia Sandgren, a 2023 novel in translation, translated from the Swedish by Agnes Broomé. And once you know what it means, and if you've read the book, you'll know that this is an important word for a fairly pivotal scene in the novel. Vernissage comes from the French. It means a preview of an art exhibition, which may be private, before the actual formal opening. And there is a vernissage that is an important scene in Collected Works. In English, you could just think of it as a private viewing, a private view. Vernissage is related to the English word varnish or varnishing, and we'll get more into the etymology of varnishing in a minute, but starting in the 19th century, summer exhibitions in places such as the Royal Academy, they would put on exhibitions where the artists would give a finishing touch to their work by varnishing them. And a custom developed where patrons and the elite could visit before the official opening while the artists were still varnishing the paintings. And so that was named a vernissage. But the name continues, at least in British English, into the 20th century, and it was an opportunity for marketing the works to buyers and letting critics have first dibs on having the first viewing. But apparently vernissage was, maybe still is, quite common in British English. This tradition of artists varnishing their paintings and putting finishing touches on them dates back to at least 1809 in England's Royal Academy of Arts. There was one famous member of the Academy, Joseph Milord William Turner. Here is a picture of him, and here is a picture of one of his paintings, because he was famous for, if not notorious, for making major changes to his paintings on the vernissage day. The English term varnishing day was also in use, but vernissage just has an extra je ne sais quoi. N'est pas? Let's look at varnish just for a minute to finish up. Varnish entered English in the mid-14th century, and it goes back to the old French word vernis, meaning varnish, was back to medieval Latin, late Greek, and going to the Greek word Berenike, or Berenike, which was the name of an ancient city in what is now Libya, which is where varnishing was first used or invented, and is now Bengazi. Hello, Hillary. And that Libyan city or town was named for a queen of Egypt named Berenike or Berenike II. And that's where we get varnish from. Bengazi, varnish. So when Hillary gave her famous testimony to the Republican House investigation back in when was it? 2015, 2014? Was it the Unvarnished Truth? I think it probably was. And that's what I've got for you tonight. Any thoughts? Any corrections? Any comments? Thanks for watching.